All right, we are rolling now. Counting us down. 3, 2.
You're listening to Missing Out with Lex Michael and Tauri J. Let's start the show.
Hello there. Welcome back to Missing Out. I'm Tauri J.
I'm Lex Michael.
And if this is your first time listening, what we do here is we introduce each other to different media, whether it be movies, music, television, spoken word, books, experiences, things that have built us up, and we hope that in sharing it, it builds you up. We are the Retrospective. That's Introspective.
You know, I've heard you say a version of that about 100 times now.
Oh, you have.
And I tell you what, it's not getting old. At least 30 people listening are like, yes, it is. All of your bullshit is so fucking trite and stale at this point.
No, people love format. People love a sense of familiarity.
It's true.
I think that like every time they hear it, like the opening piece where we're like counting down, they hear the little spiel, like the music, and then they hear us do our spiel. They're like, ooh, it's like wrapping me in a warm blanket. It feels so good. All that familiarity before we jump off the platform. And I think that it really, really brings them joy.
But there's still those 30 people that are like, fuck format, fuck the system, anarchy, chaos reigns. They flip their tables every time they listen to the show.
Well, I'm sorry, guys. Well, actually, you might be excited because today we're breaking the format a little bit.
Ooh.
This is our 100th episode.
It's true.
Hooray! Thank you guys for sticking around so long. Or if this is your first episode, hey, welcome.
It's a nice round number for you to start on.
Exactly. Take some time, go back, listen to some of our older episodes.
That's true. You will have to listen to the previous 99 to understand what's happening.
That's true. This is a very serialized podcast.
Yeah, we're the Marvel Cinematic Universe of podcasts.
Heck yeah. Just wait until we get our sweet, sweet spin-off specials. And then our some semi-good canceled spin-off specials.
Which ones were the semi-good canceled? Well, I think Agent Carter was better than semi-good. I think Agent Carter gets a whole good.
I was talking about some of the Netflix.
Got it.
Yeah.
All
so,
right.
Looking at you, Iron Fist. Looking at you, say season 2 of Daredevil.
I actually could go to bat for most of season 2 of Daredevil.
Well, you're wrong. All right, guys. So here's what we're going to be doing today. We are going to be talking about, we're kind of doing a retrospective on this introspective podcast.
I was wondering if you were going to try and tie those two things together.
I definitely did.
That was nicely done.
Thank you.
That was nicely done. I can't bench that.
Aw, well, keep working out.
Yeah.
But we will try to make this as non-navel gazy as possible. But you know, after 100 episodes, it gets you thinking about like where you started, where you're going, and we really are grateful that you guys have been here with us for this whole journey. And so we really wanted to kind of look back and see how much we've grown, talk about how we got started in the podcast arena, like the first podcasts we listened to, how we even discovered the idea of doing a podcast, what inspired us to start this show, kind of talk about the show in and of itself, like what the real thesis statement of it has been, and how we feel that we've done in terms of like keeping to that idea and that thesis. And then from there, we're going to talk about like where we want to go from here. You know, like this is kind of like the New Year's of missing out, in that like you really start to kind of figure out what your resolutions are and things that you want to do to kind of keep growing and adhering to the thesis statement, or if the thesis statement will change moving forward. And so that's really kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I don't know if this episode will be for everyone. I think it stands a chance for us to be a little back patty. So
we promise we will try and make a coherent point.
Right. I mean, I think that like as a listener, if you've ever thought about kind of getting into podcasting, I mean, this might be a way, because, you know, I feel like at some point we're going to talk about how we did it. And
Right.
so if you're interested, then I think that will be a nice insight from our perspective. So like, I'm trying to sell you on what you're going to get out of it, because I think it'll be a really fun discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. I just want you to know that there's something in it for you as well.
Those same 30 people are like, this motherfucker seems unsure. He convinced me. I don't like it.
Yeah. Well, hey, you're going to like this by the end. Hey, baby. You
No, what's going to happen is about half of those 30 people are going to like it. They're going to find themselves pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
And the other half are going to berate them for it mercilessly. And the two halves will turn on each other.
I don't want that. I don't want a civil war.
I'm not suggesting you want it, but you have great power and you need to wield it responsibly.
I'm not Spider-Man. I'm more of an anti-hero. You know, I'm like a Constantine, or like a, I don't know, who's another cool Spawn. I'm like a Spawn.
Like Spawn, yeah.
Hell yeah. Like I went to the depths of hell, and they were like, yo, do our bidding. And I was like, as long as I can go hang out with my wife.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So
I see you as more of a Luke Cage meets MODOK.
because of my giant head.
Well, it's mostly because of the fact that you're kind of box shaped and you float around a little bit. And you've got the little limbs,
little tiny hands. Yeah. And then the Luke Cage, because I'm black. I get it. Yeah. No, I see it.
Why are you taking it there?
What are you talking about? These are your words.
I was talking about you protect your neighborhood.
Oh, uh-huh.
You stick up for the little guy.
You're really backpedaling.
No,
Bro,
I'm not.
Man.
I'm stepping all the way. You got to take it uncomfortably racial.
Uncomfortably?
Yes.
That's what you use. Those were your words.
And you wield them against me in an accusatory fashion. You presume meaning that is not intended.
I mean, hey, look, if you have a meaning that you're trying to convey, be clear about it. Otherwise, all I can do is speculate.
All right, you're who else helps in it? Well, you don't want to be Spider-Man. You already established that you're not Spider-Man, and he's very much about helping. So all right, you're Daredevil because of the law degree you got.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true. And I've also been doused in chemicals. All right, so Lex, how did you get started in podcasting in terms of like, what was your first podcast?
First podcast would have been the very first episode of Smodcast, Kevin Smith's, the first of many podcasts he started with his producer and friend Scott Mosier. And that would be, I want to say 2007. And this was back when podcasts existed, but very sparsely. I think Ricky Gervais had his, but it was sort of a unexplored territory. There would now, of course, everybody you meet has a podcast. Ask your grandma; she has a podcast, and it's marked explicit, and she didn't want you to know about it.
Right,
but she's got one. She's on like 3, but it wasn't a thing the way it is now. And I was a big fan of Kevin Smith and his work at the time, and I said, okay, this is awesome. Like he does these. If you ever bought physical media copy of just about any of his movies, like commentary tracks. The commentary tracks he does with his friends who worked on the movie with him, big selling point on the discs. It's very entertaining to listen to. And I said, oh, this is awesome. This is just a way I can have, it's like it's a commentary track without a movie, essentially.
Right.
And I can take this with me. I can be like hosing down the back, like the patio or whatever the shit, and it's a little less boring because I have this nice commentary track, and they're talking about bullshit. They're just talking about whatever the fuck they feel like talking about, and it's endlessly entertaining. And I always wanted to emulate people like Kevin Smith, people like George Carlin was another really big one for me when I was growing up. People that had a well of knowledge about whether it's pop culture or just esoterica, but also an ability to wield language in a way that made that stuff genuinely interesting to listen to, whether or not you were completely clear on what they were talking about. And I very quickly said, man, one day this is something I think I'd like to do. I think it took me a while to come around to, I want to do this. Mostly at first it was, I want more content like this, so that I can A, fill my brain with more information that I'll probably never have called to use, and B, I want to enlighten myself. I want to learn. I love the fact that in these conversations, I'm getting a whole bunch of that juicy stuff that makes my brain go, ooh, yes, more juice.
Ooh.
But then at a certain point, yeah, it became, I really like talking about the stuff that I'm passionate about. And I feel like occasionally when I talk to people about it, they engage and they seem like they're interested in what I'm saying. And okay, well, maybe there's a place I can put that. So then it was a matter of more or less waiting for the universe to present me with circumstances in which that could happen.
Right.
Because you don't know until you do it really how it gets done, right? Like you listen to the podcast and you assume, okay, they record it on microphones and they put it into the computer,
right,
which then makes it go to the internet.
Yes.
But beyond that, if you've never done it, if you've never dabbled in it yourself, it's this nebulous thing. It's just, all right, it happens by magic, essentially.
Right.
So then it was about, like I said, like the universe presented me with a set of circumstances where I could immerse myself in that aspect of it as well. Like how do you take this conversation with a friend and turn it into quote unquote grown content, right? So it became less of a magical arbitrary process.
Yeah.
And then just seizing every opportunity I could to put myself in front of a microphone with people that are relatively intelligent and funny. And I've been very lucky to get to work with some people that are very much both. So then trying to then refine my own conversational style and try to emulate the people that I admire without copying the people I admire.
Right.
But if you go back and listen to, and I'm assuming it'll be the same for you as well, if you go back and you listen to the shows that I feel like I was influenced by, like Smodcast being a great example, I think you can definitely track where some of my approach to doing this job comes from.
Right.
But I like to think that I'm not just doing Kevin Smith or I'm not just doing whoever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that's it. That was a really long, rambly answer, and there are a lot of points where you and I overlap, obviously,
right,
because we ended up here. But does that answer your question?
Yes. So you're saying, just to wrap that into a little button, yeah, so your first podcast was Smodcast, and it really inspired you to want to be able to share your thoughts and feelings with other people. And so you found a way to kind of solidify that aspect to where it wasn't just a cloud, or what do they call it? Castle in the sky kind of idea. And it became something practical that you could do on a regular basis. And now you're sitting here.
See, and that's a far more concise way to say exactly what I took 6 times the amount of time to say.
But everyone's here for the 6 times amount. And then I'm just putting it into a little button so that, like, you know, you have something small and digestible.
That's true. If we were both stoic, right? If we were not big talkers, there wouldn't be any of this content. And we know y'all listening like this content because it doesn't seem like you're going anywhere. Thank you, by the way.
Yes. So yeah, and I feel like my road in terms of podcasts was weird. So it took me a little bit to figure out what my actual first podcast was. And it turns out that it was actually my friend Cameron Rice, who was a high school friend of my roommate in San Francisco.
Okay. I can track that.
Yes.
That's some Spaceball shit at the end where he's like, I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. And fucking Bill Pullman's like, what does that make us? He's like, nothing.
Which is what you'll be. Yeah, I've seen Spaceballs, bitch.
That was big. That was big in my household from a certain age to another certain age.
Yeah. But yes. So Cameron Rice, a friend of mine.
Yes.
He had a podcast called Cameron Watches Movies. And I find him to be a funny guy. I find him to be very in-depth when it comes to discussing movies and TV shows.
You said had. Does he no longer have it?
No, he doesn't do Cameron Watches Movies anymore.
Okay.
Because he does like he's moved on to doing other things. Like now he does like Hyper RPG, and he's on a show on El Royale, stuff like that. So like he's far moved on.
All right.
But that was my first one, and it was mostly because like he's a cool guy. I wanted to support him, wanted to listen to his really fun commentary. Having listened to an episode of Smodcast, I definitely hear that podcast in his podcast, which I find interesting.
Which one did you listen to?
I listened to the one that you had recommended, which was the Harry Potter, like discussion of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows.
Is that the one where he goes on this tangent and calls him fucking Voldemort?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Maybe
because there were 2 or 3 of the big Harry Potter ones.
Right. So that I listened to that one, and so his podcast was just a thing that I would listen to when I was on really long road trips, because they were about like 2 hours or so. And so when I would be driving from LA to the Bay Area, which is where I'm from, I would break up the music by listening to his podcast. And then when my friend, current roommate, Yell, moved to LA, she was like, "We're starting a podcast." And I was like, okay. I had no real sense of like how to do that or what real podcasts were like. And so, not to say that Cameron's podcast wasn't real. It just, at the time, he was a friend talking about stuff.
Right.
And so then I was like, all right, well, let's figure this out. And so we started a now defunct, you'll never find it, don't even try, podcast where it was just us kind of like figuring out how to do it. And so like all of my sensibilities kind of came from radio, where like I had very defined segments. We had little sound effects to transition you from one segment to the next. Like it was very experimental, but it was also like it had a structure to it.
Right. And see, I'm almost the complete opposite, where most of the podcasts that got me into podcasts as a listener, and the stuff that I listen to most frequently to this day, is almost entirely structureless. Like
Right.
you listen to an episode of Smodcast. Now, the Harry Potter ones, if they're talking about Deathly Hallows in particular, there might be a very loose structure insofar as it's usually Kevin Smith telling Scott Mosier the entire movie.
Right.
And then they riff on that. But largely no structure whatsoever.
It's mostly bits.
Right. And not even bits that feel like it's just stuff that comes out organically, right?
Right.
Like it's not, they're not doing any kind of pre-scripted material other
Right.
than occasionally like he'll bring something in and be like, we're talking about this shit. But like completely structureless. And for some people, like I've had conversations with some people where they're just like, but if there's no structure, why am I listening to this? And I'm like, 'cause it's funny.
I mean, I guess I get both aspects. Like I like podcasts with structure. I get the appeal of people just discussing, just like two people discussing, and you feel like you're just hanging out with people. I think it works best. I think those specifically work best and have longevity when they are already known people. I think that like if it's just two dudes sitting in a room fucking around, I think that has less longevity.
I feel attacked.
I mean, but our podcast has purpose. Like our podcast has a reason to exist, which is a great segue into us talking about like the thesis statement of Missing Out. We, Lex, Michael, and I come from and met doing a podcast network called AfterBuzz TV, where it's specifically, if you are unfamiliar with AfterBuzz TV, the idea is that, let's say you love Gossip Girl, and you're like, no one I know fucking watches Gossip Girl. Then you can go on this network, and you can watch this panel of people talking about Gossip Girl, doing an in-depth breakdown of each individual episode, and you can either watch it or you can listen to it on iTunes and all that stuff. And so we met doing a lot of the comic book stuff, had a lot of overlap. And then at some point, we both looked at each other and were like, yo, let's do a fucking podcast. And then we sat down and started trying to figure out what the concept of it would be.
So that we could, as best as possible, sidestep the trap of we're just two assholes sitting in a room and what we're doing is tantamount to masturbation.
I mean,
well, I guess you could argue, regardless of our intention and how successful we are in meeting it, this is still tantamount to masturbation.
I mean, well, it doesn't help that every episode you just have your penis in your hand and you're just like, what do I do with this?
Why can't you let me be me?
Look, I haven't mentioned, it took 100 episodes for me to even point it out. And I felt like I'd give people a little bit of background, show them the sausage, figuratively and literally.
I was hoping you weren't going to take it there, and take it there. You did.
It's a retrospective. I got to bring back some old bits. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think the expression "see how the sausage is made" is necessarily our original material.
No, but the bit is showing them the sausage is. That aspect doesn't matter. Stop trying to nitpick my grand creativity.
But
but yeah, so we were doing AfterBuzz, and the format of that show doesn't really allow for a lot of like introspection. It's mostly discussing the specific shows that you are covering.
Right. It's a combination recap, review, recap, reaction.
Right.
And that's a totally legitimate format, and there's nothing wrong with that, and those shows tend to function pretty dang well. It ain't broke, so it doesn't need fixing.
Right.
But we both had this inclination towards, let's just dig ourselves a little hole and sit in it for a while.
Well, yeah, we wanted to be able to express ourselves and really put a lot of our own thoughts and feelings into a show and find a way to connect with our audience.
For clarification, I don't mean a sad hole. I mean like a happy hole.
No, yeah, it's because we're digging in.
Right.
We got it. Yeah, totally.
Just want to make sure. I'm not advocating for holding on to sadness.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
No, there's no shame in holding on to it.
No, well, not shame.
You got to make room for other things too.
Yeah, totally.
So come down into the happy hole.
Mm-hmm. Is there glory in that hole?
This is where the sausage is made.
Yeah.
I hate myself. I need to crawl into the happy hole.
Don't hold on to sadness. But anyway, so all that to say that like we started missing out because we wanted to be able to share things not only with each other, but like an audience of people who hadn't experienced the things that we had experienced, and we realized through our friendship that we had very different upbringings and different ways that we view media and things that we experience, and wanted to find a way to bounce that off of one another. Also, we figured that like everyone at home has their own perspective on these things, and wanted a way for them to experience something that we love and also get their perspective on that as well. So like, for example, if Lex Michael views a movie and he sees himself in it, then like explore why he sees himself, and if I don't see myself in it, what the disconnect between that is, and really diving into that aspect and figuring out how the things that we experience and the things that we watch and listen to really kind of build us as people. I say it in the intro, but like literally like everything that you experience influences you in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And so we really wanted to dig into how that is. And so like, I feel like there are a lot of episodes that we are able to really dig into, like this specific media was the foundation for the way we process emotions, or the way that we view love, or the way that we express humor, things of that sort.
Right. And I don't know about you, but you talk about how the media we experience, it helps inform who we are, right? You say it in the intro as well. I don't know about you, but media far more than anything else was for my entire childhood, but really up through this day, just about. Media has been the biggest consistent source of education, I would say, of insight, of empathy, of honestly a lot of the time positive reinforcement. When I was growing up, there weren't too many adults that I felt were making a grand effort to connect with me and teach me things. There's a lot of negative reinforcement,
right,
not a lot of positive reinforcement. So at first, you're very young, you get plopped in front of a TV, and it's all entertainment for the sake of entertainment and placation. But you start to branch out if you're so inclined, and you start to see, well, I can watch weird example, but we recently had a conversation about the original Godzilla, the original Ishiro Honda Godzilla, and that's a movie where, yes, you could watch it as total entertainment, placation. You can completely check out. It's a fun movie. It's a big monster puppet messing up miniature cities and stuff. It's a fun watch, but
technically he's a monster suit. Get it right.
Well, there's one where there's a little puppet head.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, there's a little puppet.
You're
head.
right.
But you can also view it through an entirely different prism, which is, as we discussed on that episode, the entire movie, Godzilla himself, is a metaphor for atomic destruction. And you have a movie made by Japanese filmmakers, not very long, within about a decade, little more than a decade, of their country suffering nuclear annihilation, being the only country to suffer that kind of nuclear annihilation. And here's how they're processing it. And it's a way to genuinely learn through this ostensibly goofy monster movie. You can, if you want to engage with it on this level, you can learn something about that time and place in the world and in history, and how people who aren't you, who don't necessarily look like you, who don't come from where you come from, were processing something truly seismically massive. And it's a way to genuinely learn things beyond the scope of what is actually in the frame. And that's what drove from my childhood forward, drove this intellectual curiosity, right? And then finding podcasts, these people that seem to have all of this information that I was hungry for.
Yeah.
Wanting to get there, wanting to sound like I could just pull all of the same information. Like, how does he know all of this useless shit?
Mm-hmm.
But there's that aspect, and then there's, maybe as a byproduct of that, movies especially being the greatest influence, the greatest guiding factor, the greatest source of education, of in a lot of ways of happiness, of good feelings. I get a huge kick out of talking to people about a movie I really, really enjoyed, having them go, that actually sounds really interesting, really cool, going and checking it out, and then coming back to me being like, I really dug that. Like, I get a huge fucking kick out of that feeling. And so I don't know how closely you can relate to that, but my guess would be is you got some of that, because if you didn't, I don't know what would have drawn you to this in the first place, because I feel like this is what we're doing.
Right.
We're doing that both for the person sitting across the table from us as we share things with each other, but also with all of the people, all of you guys that are listening. And I hope some of you listened to an episode when that sounds cool, fun, interesting, fucking weird, whatever.
Yeah.
Went and checked it out and came away going, that was cool. I'm glad I heard of that thing.
Yeah. I think there's a little bit of overlap in terms of the sharing aspect, but for me, I think my main thesis in terms of creating content, and this is something I try to apply to everything I create, is that like the idea of making something that makes people feel less alone.
Yes.
And so the sharing is a way of expressing myself, and in talking about it, it allows someone to hear something inside of them that they necessarily didn't know that other people felt. And
that's,
so like,
yeah, that's a nice way to put that. And that's actually very true for me, but I don't know that I would have thought to phrase it quite that way.
I mean, that's something that I think that is the main driver behind every episode that we try to create. And even the ones that are silly or just bits, I like to imagine that like even that in some way is helpful, in that like sometimes you don't need to hear two people talking about depression this day, and so you can hear us doing our dumb bits, and you find some form of entertainment in it, and it's something that you can just, allows you to just feel in that moment.
Right.
So like I feel like there always has to be some kind of merit behind what we're doing, and so like that's why I try not to deride. I try not to deride the podcast where it is just two people talking in a room, because that in and of itself, as you said, like it's funny, like that's the purpose of it, is to give you either an escape from the world that you're having to deal with, because everyone's going through something, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, ain't nobody being like, oh man, I'm sitting pretty, everything's going my way. And so I feel like people are very quick to dismiss the idea of things that are just entertaining for the sake of being entertaining. And myself included, like sometimes I'm just like, what's the fucking point of this? And the point is to bring you joy in that moment.
Right.
That's the point.
To make you feel a little bit connected to something, right? Because that's true. A lot of podcasts, you feel when it is just two people talking, bullshitting in a room, if their brand of goofy bullshit aligns with your brand of goofy bullshit, then you get to feel for an hour, 2 hours, however long their show is, you get to feel like you're hanging out with people you know.
Right.
And that can help, man. Like we've talked about depression on the show before. I've been in some pretty low spots where I didn't really feel like there was anybody I could talk to. I didn't feel like I had people around that I felt super comfortable hanging with and being open and honest with. And podcasts that sort of fit that model were a great help to me, because I got to feel like, okay, yes, I can't actually engage with the people I'm listening to, which is the one factor that's missing. But yeah, it made me feel like here's a safe space I can go to sort of hang with, like you were saying before, this feeling of familiarity, just in a different way than format breeds familiarity. Personality breeds familiarity as well, and you can feel a little bit connected, a little bit less alone in that moment. So yeah, I think there's no reason to deride something that's entertaining for its own sake, because that can still be of tremendous value.
Right. Though, I will say that I think my favorite episodes that we've done are the ones where we really got to dive into just like the human condition.
Sure.
Which sometimes end up being the ones that we completely break the format of our show.
Right.
So like, I think it was episode 36. It was the Either Or by Elliott Smith. That was yours that you brought in.
Yes.
And I thought we got really like in depth in terms of like what it's like to exist in a place of living with mental health, and the idea of like being in any given moment a place where, you know, you could feel like, you know, suicide might be an answer. Like these places that like are fairly triggering, but they're things that people don't really get to talk about very often.
Right.
Like I know that like when I was at my most depressed, and like anytime like I felt like suicidal, I couldn't talk to anyone about it.
Right.
Like even my therapist, because you say the words suicide and they're like, oh baby, you going in a psych hold. Right. Oh boy, you ready to get 5150'd, my dude? And I'm like, I'm not. I just want to tell you how I feel.
Right. And even if it's not taken as far as, well, we got to put you in a padded cell for your own sake, it's all so intensely stigmatized that so many people who have the experience, who have the knowledge, are afraid to speak up for fear of being shunned, of being viewed as weak, etc.
Right.
And you don't get too terribly many forums where people can talk about it candidly, openly, displaying that vulnerability. And you don't get, whether or not you yourself are the one who's being that open, I feel like just hearing others who are comfortable enough to share that part of themselves, who aren't afraid of that stigma, who say like, yes, this is part of who I am, and that's okay. It's okay that this is part of who you are. You don't have to be ashamed of it.
Yeah.
Something else I know, at least for me, has been pretty helpful in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And I also, so there's an episode that we did that was completely different from our usual format, which was the one with Matt Sterling Nye, where he talked about his dad, so we usually cover dumb shit like media and books and whatever.
All of the dumb shit that we just spent however much time regaling you with the importance of. Yes, all of that.
I had to take it down so I could lift this up.
I see.
You know, the LA way.
Yes, you can't raise something without lowering something else.
Exactly.
That's how you know you're a true Angelino.
Hell yeah. Mm-hmm. But no, I really, he brought in stories about his dad, which I thought were really cool.
Yeah.
Because the idea was that his dad was very, like, he wasn't perfect. He was very flawed, but he also was very influential to his life, which I think that like we all have that experience. Doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, but like we all have someone in our lives who deeply flawed, but really helps us become the person that we are.
Right. And something else that I loved about that episode as well, and this is, it gets at what my platonic ideal for the show is.
Yeah.
I love that he could talk about his father, his experiences with his dad, and what a storied life his dad had, and how human the man was. And get super real in that sense. But also, as part of that conversation, we also talked to him about his experiences as an actor working in entertainment and how he ended up. We talked about he's got a little part in Iron Man 3. He's now in the movie that Jason Mewes directed, dovetails back into the Kevin Smith connection.
Yeah.
It's called Madness in the Method, which you can check out on Amazon and stuff. Pretty sure we're going to get him back on the show kind of soon. And I'm going to pick his brain about how he ended up landing that project. But we could talk about that as well. So if you have an interest in the entertainment business, and most people have at least a passing interest in it if they are media fixated,
yeah,
you get to learn a little bit about that as well. And that's sort of my platonic ideal. You either get the real human stuff and or the really funny, goofy bits, but also we get to drop a little bit of actual knowledge. Like we did an episode on M, Fritz Lang's M. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the episodes when somebody says, where should I jump in? What's a good one to listen to get an idea for what the vibe is? That's one of the ones I usually tell people, because I feel like that's a perfect intersection, for me at least, of we're actually talking about, the context in which the movie was made historically, but also, the sort of context within German Expressionism was functioning at the time. We then also get to talk about the really, really dumb, goofy shit. And I love when we get to do both. That's sort of that type of thing, right? The show we did on M, the conversation we had with Matt, that they get at exactly what I personally have been hoping to do with whatever show I ended up doing. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of do's, I think, in that sense. Or I think there might have only been 2, but it felt like there were a lot. There were
saying there was a little doo-doo in there?
Big do's.
Big doo-doos?
Yeah. That's
big old do.
All right.
Key.
This is going to be our last episode of Missing Out, because I have the amount of discomfort I'm in, finally, it tipped the glass.
Yeah. I mean, do you have other, like, I guess those are your favorites. I mean, I assume that you have a bunch of other favorites that you've talked about.
Well, there are a few. I mean, another one we did, and it was pretty close. It was around the M show. We also did an episode on Mandy, the movie with Nick Cage.
Yeah.
Which had loose-ish structure to it also, insofar as we actually did go through the movie, occasionally riffing on it the way, not dissimilar to the episode of Smodcast you listened to, it sounds like, where their loose structure, the plot of the movie is the backbone of their conversation.
Right.
But then you use that to ground you, and then you get to go wherever you want because you always have somewhere to come back to. And like that, I feel like we got fairly close to doing that with efficiency in that episode. And I remember it being a really fun conversation, although as I mentioned earlier, in this episode, I don't remember most of the shit that we talk about after the fact, but I remember walking away going, I feel good about how that went. Whereas normally I walk away going, fuck.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of structure, something I really like and can, retrospect on, since I was kind of going through some of the older episodes, just to refresh myself on which ones were my favorite, why they were my favorites, and things of that sort, is I liked being able to see how we had grown over the course of, like, just from episode 1 to episode 2, we got our official intro, and we started kind of figuring out how we wanted to start talking, like at the front, in terms of how we would want to start doing it, our like what our catchphrase was and all that stuff. And so, like, you can hear us over the course of the podcast kind of refining all these little aspects of it.
And also, I like to think too, especially if you start with our very first episode where we talked about Rocky, I feel, I will speak for myself, I feel like it took me quite some time, even after coming from a place where we were doing podcast content regularly and live, I still feel like it took me a good chunk of time to actually settle and just find what felt like a groove where I could relax a little bit.
Right.
I feel like I hopefully haven't dropped the level of passion, but I feel like I've dropped the wrong kind of intensity, I think.
Well, I mean, I think that doing something like this, because it is something that we put so much of ourselves into,
Yeah.
it definitely has that nervous aspect to it, because like doing the live format that we used to do, we were given the structure, and the focus wasn't us. It wasn't it was a bit of our thoughts, but it was our thoughts about a thing.
Right.
And so there wasn't so far as like how much of us would go into it. It was just like we went there, we watched a show, we talked about the show, and then we left. But this venture that we had started, and I think it took me a while as well to really get into the groove of how do you share this idea, and how do you make it something that like other people want to consume, and something that it isn't just me, going through audio therapy. It's me trying to connect with the people who are listening, and people hearing what I'm saying and also seeing themselves in it.
Right.
And so I definitely get that feeling of it taking a while to really be comfortable with the you that you're sharing, and then knowing exactly like what it is that, or I guess who you are, that you're sharing with people.
Right. Well, and then also figuring out what it is that you bring beyond just it's me, because look, everybody's got a podcast now. So if you're looking to start your own, like we were, you have to figure out, well, if I want this to find an audience, what differentiates it from every other show that exists? Right. What is what about our take on things is unique? What about our mission statement is different? Because otherwise, and look, there's nothing wrong with this is just me and a buddy, and that's what we have to offer, because that some of that can be really entertaining.
Right.
It's hard to stand out in the giant crashing sea of podcast content that now exists.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out, both in terms of how do you pitch your show, but also in terms of, for me, feeling or being able to relax.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Knowing or feeling relatively confident that, yes, we both bring a great deal of ourselves to the show, obviously, but also that I genuinely do have something to say that is a hair different than what everybody else is saying. And of course, those 30 people we're talking about earlier, they're sitting there going, your fucking confidence is misplaced.
Look, 30 people. Well, those 30 people are already tuned out. They're already gone.
Oh no, they're hate listeners. Like they're still here. They hate the show, but it's like people who watched The Walking Dead for 3 years longer than they could stand the show.
Right.
And I was like, if you don't like it, like why put yourself through that? And just like, I need the hate. I need it. I can't feel anything if I don't feel hate.
Right. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they're
still here. Hey guys, hey 30 people.
Yo, what's up?
This is actually where on the timeline. This is pre their Civil War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is like mid phase 2.
Yes. This is right. And they're going to get to the end of this episode, and they're going to look back. They're going to do their own recap, review, reaction of this episode, and midway through that conversation, is when I think the Civil War is going to break.
Oh, dude, I would love that.
Yeah.
But so you were talking about
30 people's a lot for one podcast.
No. Yes. Oh, you mean like being together in a room?
Yeah.
Oh, got it. No, I mean, yes. I think that anything more than 3 is a tough sell. Unless, nope, anything more than 3 is tough sell.
It does get a little bit tricky to make sure that everybody gets a turn to say something and also has something to say.
Right.
Because by the time you get to person 4, it's like, yep, I agree. I agree with what person 1 through 3 said.
But yeah, and so you were talking a little bit about the idea of standing out amongst the crowd and having a thesis statement in your podcast. So like, let's say, and this is for anyone out there who is like, but like, how do I start a podcast? You guys are my first podcast, and you're like our smodcast.
That's a wild thought, right? Like the chance exists. Of course, there are as we keep saying, there are so many podcasts now. decent chance if statistically if you're listening to us, you have a podcast of your own. But you got to think, right? There's at least one person who listens to this show for whom we're their first podcast.
Right.
I'm sorry. That's got to be really disorienting and uncomfortable, but that's a wild thing to think about.
Right.
Because we have an audience, you know what I mean? It's and yeah, that thought is actually really cool. Like, I'm not assuming that there's too terribly many of you that fit this description, but if there's one, I think I don't know, man. I feel like that's something worth celebrating? Question mark.
Yes. Well, I mean, and so in spirit of we talked about in one episode we talked about maps of non-existent places, and in that episode we really talked about the idea of like going out and just like taking the first steps towards doing something that you want to do.
Right.
And so with that idea and the idea that this could be someone's first podcast, or this could be a podcast that really like makes someone feel like they can do a podcast themselves.
Right.
I mean, what would you say, like your personal rules in terms of like, how does someone stand out? Like, how does someone find their voice in terms of making a podcast?
That's all right. That's, I feel like, a tricky question to answer because I feel like that's going to vary from person to person.
Right. I mean, I have a few general rules that like I try. So whenever I'm trying to advise someone on like starting a podcast, I have a few like general rules to stick by. And they're hard, fast rules. You don't have to like really follow them at all. But like if you're just getting into it, my number one aspect is sustainability.
Okay.
So sustainability comes in terms of like two main aspects. Aspect one, can the concept of your podcast, is it something that you can be passionate about for a long period of time?
Okay, that tracks.
And the other aspect is your podcast something that you physically, in terms of the work involved in doing, can also sustain?
Right.
And so that being that, like, let's say your podcast is about nails, not the ones that you hammer, but the ones that are on your fingers.
And toenails.
And so are you able to talk about the different aspects of fingernails, whether it be like manicures and upkeep and gel and all that stuff? How long do you feel like you'll be able to talk about this in a passionate way and find new aspects to entertain? So like that's why you see a lot of pop culture podcasts, because there's always new pop culture. Mm-hmm. And so there's always something new to talk about. And so it really relies on your take.
Yes.
But you'll get other more niche podcasts with like, you know, you have history podcasts, which, you know, that also depends on your take, but it also, you stand out by doing a good amount of research and finding a way to make it more digestible.
I would highly recommend Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. Mm-hmm. Where are you familiar?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Oh, man. I want to get back onto it because he does. Now, his episodes can sometimes be 4.5 hours. So you're really signing up for an audiobook. But he will do these massive multi-part histories. Great wars, great battles, great civilizations. And he makes it insanely listenable.
Right. And so that also takes me into the idea of sustainability in terms of the process. So I imagine that podcast requires a lot of research. It requires a lot, I don't know how much like editing that he has to do, how well like mixed it is, because I haven't listened to it. But I assume that it takes a bunch of different aspects of this history and really requires him to consolidate it into his 4-hour thing. And so I'm sure that there are takes that he doesn't use, and there are whole segments that either become irrelevant in his research that he has to just scrap. And so sustainability is also figuring out if, like, let's say you are launching weekly, are you able to do the research and recording and editing of your podcast to turn it around in that week? If not, can you do a bi-weekly? And if so, how how quickly can you do this and maintain the quality? Something about like audiences will respond to consistency, which is great, but they also will notice drops in quality. So you have to make sure.
And people will let you know.
Right. And so that's another aspect of it. And that's not to say that like, if you can't if your thing is unsustainable, don't do it. It's more that like, you have to make sure that you are honest with yourself about the expectations that you're giving yourself, right, and what you're trying to do.
Right. And that commitment is important. In my mind anyway, I treat this show like a job, not insofar as it feels like work, but insofar as no, I'm making a commitment. It is my job to make sure that I am every week at a certain place at a certain time to make sure we get a show in the can.
Right.
I treat it like I would treat any other job because that consistency is crucial. And something else, now that I feel like I understand the question you asked a little bit more fully.
Yeah.
Something else for me is I would highly recommend don't talk about something just because it is a hot, trendy thing to talk about, even if it is something that you could find new ways to discuss relatively indefinitely. Because if you're not genuinely passionate about the thing, people can smell that.
Right.
And it's not that fun to listen to.
Yeah.
And say what you will about whether or not I'm an interesting person or funny or smart, etc. I do think it's fairly clear I at least genuinely love the shit that we talk about.
Right. But also in that regard, don't be afraid to kind of stumble your way through the process.
Right. Like we talked about, we're still stumbling our way through this shit.
Right.
We've been doing this show for 100 episodes and 2 years. And I feel sometimes like I'm still figuring shit out.
I mean, yes. I don't think that we put down the spoiler wall until like probably episode like 70, 80, something like that. Like the process of creating something and creating content is growing and taking that feedback and knowing how better to connect with your audience. And so your first attempts will never be your last attempts, and you always have room to keep growing.
Right.
Some podcasts don't even catch on until like their 200 something episode. So what
you're saying is there's still hope for us.
Yes. But also, all that said, I mean, kind of do whatever the fuck you want. Like these are, again, not hard, fast rules. These are, if someone is looking to build a podcast empire, those are the main questions I ask them. But if you're like, yo, I just want to watch this show and talk about it, then fucking do that. Or you're just like, yo, me and my friends love to talk about stuff and I just want to like record it and put it up on the internet, then do that shit.
Right.
Like these are like, we, as Lex said, we kind of view this as like, we take it like a job. But like podcasting is also something that you can do just for fun.
Well, and I think it's important again to make the distinction. Yes, I say job, but we do it because we love doing it. So a question that I get asked, I don't know if you get asked this question, but I get asked, and I think a lot of people who have big podcast audiences get asked, well, how do you monetize this? How do you make money? How does it become like a job in that aspect?
Right.
And my answer to that question is, I will let you know when I have an answer to that question. Be Joe Rogan. That's my answer to that question.
I mean, that's the fastest way to monetize it, is to literally be Joe Rogan.
Not in terms of do a show like his. Literally be him. But my point is, we don't do this because we're making truckloads of money doing it. We committed to it completely because we love doing it. We love the idea of doing it, and
right.
We feel fulfillment in the doing of it. And that's something else. Treat it like, okay, I'll put it this way. Don't get into podcasting looking to get rich, because you're going to be very disappointed. I would say, no, you do it out of the love for it. And that is where that's how you're going to find your voice, your truest voice, I think, most efficiently, and probably the most quickly.
Right.
So yes, the commitment is crucial because like you're saying, consistency is crucial. I'd say in that respect, treat it like a job, but treat it like a job where your pay has to be sort of the joy you take in doing it. And hopefully if you build your audience, the joy that you take in connecting with people who hear what you say and dig it, cause again, that's not going to pay your rent, but, it's better than the nothing. You know what I mean? Like, it's better than the literally nothing that you receive if you can't hold on to those aspects.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, if nothing else, if none of that appeals to you, it's also building a skill. In that, like,
For sure.
as you're doing it, every time you make and release an episode, you are improving just a little bit. You get a little faster in your edit. You come up with new ideas and you execute those, and then you take feedback and you also execute that, or you have to discern what is good feedback versus shit posting, stuff like that. And you really have to, like, you really learn the skill of, one, trusting yourself. You learn the skill of, if you're editing, you learn how to maneuver in this platform or whatever tool you're using. You're learning that. You're learning SEO in terms of how SEO is search engine optimization, in terms of how to allow people to find your content. You're learning how to interact on social, things that, like, it's a skill, and it's a skill that isn't going away anytime soon. And so, like, I think that at the very least, even if you're just doing it for fun, you're still learning. It's edutainment. So I think that is one of my biggest takeaways in terms of, like, doing podcasts. And it's something I learned with my first very dumb, very not findable podcast. Was how to...
What is it called? I'm going to see if I can find it.
Was how to build a podcast, and what was sustainable and what wasn't sustainable, and what appeals and what doesn't, and things that I'm interested in doing. And so, like, those things and those aspects I learned by doing these podcasts and getting dirty. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you really don't want me to find this?
No.
All right.
I feel like I've been very specific in saying, don't.
You have, and that's why I need to.
So, I don't care about your feelings. Your feelings are meaningless to me.
Remember all that shit I said since the episode started? It's bullshit.
I mean, that is my general take on anything. Like, listen to what I say, and then just, like, take what you want.
Sure.
The rest of it, just throw it on the ground. Not on the ground, in a garbage can, because littering's bad. Don't litter.
If there is a recycling receptacle nearby, put it there. That's important. You got to sort.
So and by recycle, we mean just regurgitate it to someone else.
Right.
And then go, but, like, don't like live by it. Just, like, hear it and take what you want. And then that person will take pieces that they want, and then they'll give it to them. Like, that's how it works.
That's how words lose meaning.
No, all words have meaning. All of them, Lex. But, like, what else would you want to see for the future? Like, what kind of show do you want to be putting on in the next 100 episodes?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we have been very lucky in terms of getting some interesting folks who want to come and chat with us. And honestly, just expanding that network. Like, that's the most exciting thing for me as I look forward to what I see potentially for us doing this. And it's been one of my favorite things about doing the show this entire time is it's an amazing way to network with other people. Yeah. Especially when you live in Los Angeles, it's very difficult to see people socially because everybody is busy all the time. This is a really great way to put something definitive on the calendar, which feels like it's a job, it's a thing, but, like, you actually get to network with folks.
Yeah.
And my biggest hope, and I'm seeing it happen, and it's been happening more and more and more, is we get to expand that network. We get to talk to people that we maybe wouldn't have ordinarily struck up a conversation with about topics we wouldn't necessarily have thought were that fascinating. And then because we meet this person who's super passionate about that thing, we suddenly go, oh my God, I've never thought about ears of corn in that way.
Yep.
Whatever it is, we're gonna get the corn people in here soon. We're gonna one of those 30 people I keep talking about.
Yeah.
The reason they hate us is because there's not enough corn talk, and we're gonna get the corn people in here, and we're gonna sway them. We're gonna win them back if they don't die in the Civil War.
That's true. I mean, guys, if you want us to talk about more corn, I love Freak on a Leash. Undone is one of my favorites. Falling Away From Me is okay.
Yeah. I like Popping It. I like it on the cob. I like it off the cob.
Cool. Yeah. I would say that Twisted Transistor is my favorite.
I like the word shuck, and I feel like it exists only in reference to corn, which is pretty fascinating. Like, it has its own verb.
I mean, technically, shucking and jiving is a thing, but don't worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I didn't want to crush your hopes. You got real deflated.
Man, I just let me celebrate the uniqueness and the majesty of corn.
Yeah, I get it. Like, it's also like very much in the black community, and I get you not having that reference, which is what this show is about.
Exactly.
I just expanded your world.
So but in terms of using that as a verb, is there any connection whatsoever, or is it just it's a homonym? They sound the same, but they mean two different things.
I don't know. I'll get back to you. Internet. But I think that, like, for me, especially you were talking about guests, I do definitely want to expand our guest pool, get more women of color in here.
For sure.
And also just, like, expand our breadth. Like, we talk about experiences and we talk about books and different things like that, and I want to really keep expanding into, like, really what the definition of this show means is, like, anything people are missing out on, and allowing people to really share things that, like, they don't get to talk about very often.
Yes.
And I really want to keep, because, like, I'm a big personal stories guy. Like, I love hearing people talk about the things that they love and things that, like weird, quirky stories that they are able to share. And so, like, that is the big appeal of the show is just hearing people share those things and hearing people really, like, and even if it's, like, not great things, like when James Lott Jr. was on and he was talking about his experience in that store and how it was really shitty because, like, being a black man, especially, like, a tall black man, is it's rough times. But, like, that's an experience that people don't get to hear very often outside of, like, the news, which is trying to politicize it. It's just you get a really personal you get the really personal aspect of that experience, and I think that means a lot more when people hear it.
Agreed.
And so, like, that is what I want. And I think that, like, I mentioned that some of my favorite episodes are when we kind of bend the format a little bit. And so I think I want to do a little bit more of that. Like, last year, I think we talked about doing more of an NPR style thing for D&D, and we just haven't had a chance to, like, get it done because it's going to be a lot of editing. It's going to be a lot of recording and a lot of just, like, dead air and parsing and things of that sort.
Right.
And so it's a project. It's just a big project. And so I still want to do it, and I still want to do more things that are kind of winking and nudging at the podcast realm, because we have the platform to do so, and we have the freedom to really expand what this show can do. And I really want to flex those muscles.
That sounds like a good time to me.
It should be. And I hope that you guys at home are strapped in and you're willing to take the ride with us. Like, we really are grateful that you've been here for the last 100 episodes or 2 episodes or 20 episodes, 30 episodes, however long you've been here. We're glad that you're here.
Isn't it wild that there are people who have been listening since the first episode and still want to hear us talk?
I mean, I just, yeah, but I think it's mostly, I'm just more grateful than in awe. You know what I'm saying?
I feel like it's about 50-50. for
Okay.
me. I have immense amounts of gratitude. It's humbling. It really, like, it is. And I don't mean that facetiously in the slightest. There is something very humbling about it. It also just blows my fucking mind.
Yeah.
Like, I think I have some stuff to say. I don't think I'm that interesting, but apparently some of y'all think we're sort of on point sometimes, and that's cool to think about.
Yeah.
Because there's a few of you. There's a decent number of you, and that's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Because as we say on this show every so often, we only have a show because you listen. If nobody's listening, technically it's not a show. We're just sitting here having a conversation.
Right. If a podcast happens in the woods and no one's there to hear it, did it really happen?
It's like Schrodinger's podcast.
Yeah.
Like it's both in the cloud and not in the cloud at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Until you log on.
Yes.
So you got to reset your password.
Which is always hard.
It's so
difficult.
Jump through so many hoops,
especially with 2-point verification. Ugh.
Yeah.
What if you don't have your phone with you?
Right.
How are you going to even get in? You know?
You can't.
Ugh.
And nobody will ever know whether or not there was actually a podcast.
That's true. I mean, it's a good thing that we're on so many different platforms. We're on Spotify, Google Play Store, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, everywhere that you want to be, we are there. Listening back, I remember there were different episodes where we were like, now we're on this thing, and now we're on that thing, and now we're on all the good ones.
And we weep, for there are no worlds left to conquer.
Indeed. Except for dead ass. Pa-pow, 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 pa-pow. Yes?
We'll talk about it. I don't know if I'm comfortable signing off at this moment, but we'll discuss that.
But I mean, all right. Fair enough. I mean, but what about you guys? You know, do you have favorite episodes? If so, I mean, definitely let us know. If you hate what we're doing, text Lex. You can tweet him at, what is it? The Lex Michael?
Yeah, but why would you do that?
So yeah, specifically tweet at Lex.
You know what? Actually, that reminds me of something else. This is not a hard rule for me, but it's something that it's something. No, shut up. It's no, but in all seriousness, I feel personally like there is more than enough negativity on the internet. More than enough. It can be a nasty place, and I don't ever want to be somebody that adds to that. I don't like going negative if I can avoid it, because I don't see anything constructive in it.
Yeah.
I also don't feel, I feel like most of the time when people go negative about something, they're looking to dunk on it. And I feel like it's easy and it's facile. And I, more than anything else, I don't feel like I learn a single thing from listening to something like that. So it ends up yielding nothing. For me personally, my taste, my inclinations, ends up yielding nothing of value. So I try to, at the very least, even if I don't have something truly substantive to say about it, I try to keep things as positive as I can. Try and find one nice thing, if I can find a nice thing, to emphasize instead of the negative. And I feel like ultimately that makes for a better experience overall, at least for me as an audience member.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, I'm not saying you need to do this, because there's plenty, I mean, we all, outrage shit drives clicks and stuff. So, okay, you want to do that, knock yourself out. But I would encourage folks to do their best to focus on things that they love, that they have positive things to say about, versus putting more negativity out there.
Right.
That's just how I feel. You take that or leave it.
No, I think that they should definitely take it, because it's good advice, and it's good because like there's enough shitty stuff out there. Like you just flip on the news and there's a lot of sad things. We don't need more of that in the ether.
Well, we don't even have to talk. I mean, yeah, everything is awful, but we don't even have to talk about the real shit. We would just be talking about, you know, low stakes stuff, like whether or not you liked a movie, right? Like, what are you really adding to the conversation if you're like, it sucks, I hate it?
I mean, I think that people are free to express their...
You're allowed to. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just posing a rhetorical question.
Right.
What does that actually add to the proceedings?
But if they don't say it sucks, how is the studio going to know? How is the studio... Because right now they gauge it by money. And look, there are a bunch of things that make a lot of money that aren't my cup of tea.
Right.
So if the studio doesn't hear Joe Hatred go on the internet and say, I hate this thing, how are they going to know?
Yeah.
How are they going to know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you should go to Lex Michael's Twitter, and anything bad you have to say about anything, just shoot it to him. Just the Lex Michael.
I just think there are more productive ways to engage with this shit. And also, like you just said, there are plenty of things that make money that aren't necessarily your cup of tea, but that, I think, is a really crucial distinction that I would encourage people to try and internalize. There is a big difference between not your cup of tea and it's not good in an objective sense. And I feel like a lot of people conflate the two, and they end up sounding a little silly. I would say, even if you don't have something in a positive direction of profound insight or substance, I would much rather hear you say empty shit that is positive, because at least you're spreading positivity.
Right.
I think that's it. I feel like I've said what I have to say on that subject.
Okay.
But
All
this
right.
is stuff that I try and do myself. You know what I mean? Like, I try to make it clear that this thing is not for me, but I see it as valid, and here's one thing. Like, I'll put in the effort to find one thing that I can connect with, because it is only if I can't find a single nice thing to say about it that I have actually wasted my time.
Right.
In my opinion.
Okay. And I feel like that's a good place to wrap this up. This is our 100th episode special. Dab, dab, dab. But yeah, guys, let us know, not to be weird, but let us know things that you enjoy about the show. Let us know if you have any favorite episodes. Let us know what you'd like to see moving forward. You can do so at Missing Outcast. That's MISSINGOUTCAST. We love hearing from you guys. We love that you've been with us this long, and we hope that you're here another 100 episodes. So do so. We can't wait to hear what you want to hear from us. Lex Michael, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram to address any pressing, immediate life or death concerns you may have at the Lex Michael.
Yeah, and any mean things you have to say about anything,
send them
make sure to
at Tauri J.
Yeah, you can find me at Tauri J, TURIJAY. You can send me anything. Hit up my DMs.
You cannot send me anything. Please keep it within the bounds of good taste.
Got it.
But Tauri, you can send, and sky's the limit.
Sky's the limit. I mean, I'll definitely go through. I'm sometimes pretty squeamish when it comes to I don't know, animal torture and stuff. Probably shouldn't have told you that. But
you're right. You want everybody to think. You want to maintain this illusion that you're A-okay with animal torture.
I mean, but then because trolls on the internet are like, "Yo, that's what you don't like? Here's 50."
Right.
But anyway. So yeah, send me all the stuff. Good vibes, bad vibes, all the vibes. Let's chat. And we will talk to you soon. But signing off our 100th episode, this has been the Retrospective that's Introspective.
And now you have a new perspective.
Aww.
Yeah.
Aww.
But see, it took us a while to nail that too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Always growing.
Always growing.
Always growing.
Oh boy. So much discomfort.